Hey y'all, welcome to Killer Queens, a true crime podcast. I'm your host, Torella, and like most millennials, I've always had an obsession with true crime. On KQ, you'll find light true crime stories, millennial hypes and gripes, some adult language, and maybe a special guest here and there. Just like a 90s sleepover, we're just a couple BFFs hanging out, so gather round and let's launch right into it. This episode contains discussion of sexual assault, mention of suicide, and murder by physical attack. Listener discretion is advised. When the congregation of a church in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, learned that their pastor and his wife had brought a woman into their home to help her when she was down on her luck, they weren't surprised. But when that woman later went missing and they heard whispers of secrets hidden from them and the public, they were deeply shocked and needed answers. This is the story of Marie Carlson's disappearance and murder and the lasting impressions she made on her family and friends. All right, you guys. This one is written by Mark. Thank you. And he also partially requested it. It's local for him in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. Lucky dick. I wish I lived in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. But no. I have to live in Tennessee. I do love Tennessee, but, you know, my doctor prescribed vitamin C. Yeah, right. Okay. And also, Lindsay Williams, thank you so much for requesting this case. This is on a Dateline episode. It's a Keith episode. Highly suggest you watch it. Keith is a favorite. He's a favorite. Love them all. Love them all. The ladies at Date with Dateline have given them all nicknames. There's Mankey with the Hanky, Josh Mankiewicz. Keith, he's the king of lean, because he leans a lot. Queen Andrea Canning. And Dennis Murphy. Dennis is enough. I think that's all the main ones. But we love a Keith episode. Keith is just a fucking riot. Love everything about him. He could not be more perfect. He is up there for me with Bill Curtis. Bill Curtis is my number one. I haven't unpacked this office yet since I moved, but I have one of those idol candles or whatever, true crime idol candles of Bill Curtis, and it needs to go right behind me. Be super cute. Okay. But anyway, Dateline, obviously amazing. All right, let's talk about Marie Carlson. We are headed to Florida's Panhandle on the Emerald Coast. The nickname comes from the vivid greenish hue of the water, which results from the sun reflecting off algae in the Gulf of Mexico. It is just beautiful. Fort Walton Beach has those gorgeous white sand beaches. You just can't get any better. Emerald green waters, rich cultural history, real vibrant town. Fort Walton Beach is located between Pensacola and Panama City and is a part of the greater Destin-Fort Walton Beach metropolitan area. This area is a popular destination for tourists, especially families seeking a relaxing getaway. Beyond its beaches, the city offers a wide range of attractions from museums and parks to historic landmarks, all set in a laid-back, friendly environment. Fort Walton Beach sits on the shores of the Gulf of Mexico and is renowned for its soft sugar white sand, which is actually finely ground quartz crystals that were washed down from the Appalachian Mountains thousands of years ago. I did not know that. I just know it's real pretty and I like it. For anyone who hasn't been, when you walk on the beaches in Destin, Fort Walton Beach, it makes a little squeaking sound. It does. I never put that together though. Mark, he always be dropping the knowledge. It does. It makes this little sound. He actually added a link to it. Oh, maybe we can drop the noise in. You can hear it, but it does. I never thought about that. Wow. Okay. The beaches stretch along Okaloosa Island, a narrow strip of land connecting Fort Walton Beach to the nearby city of Destin. The crystal clear emerald waters are ideal for swimming, snorkeling, paddleboarding, and other water activities, making the area a paradise for outdoor enthusiasts. We sure do love it. We go there twice a year. We're definitely very lucky that it's about a 7-hour drive for us. So for us, that's the beach we go to. Like if you live in Middle Tennessee, Alabama area, that's where you're going to be driving to. At least the people that we know. We're further away from like Myrtle Beach or Hilton Head or anything like that. That's more of like a 10-hour drive. I do have some friends that go to Hilton Head every year and that's their destination. It's just once you have the white sand beaches, man, it's hard to go back to just sand. It really is. The Choctawhatchee Bay sits between Fort Walton Beach and Destin, and there's a huge sandbar known as Crab Island that is in the middle of the bay. And during the spring and summer months, this is a place where people will glitched. Will anchor down their boats and spend all day hanging out and just having a good time in the waist deep water. There are floating bars where people can buy drinks and snacks. Sometimes there's inflatable obstacle courses set up for kids to run through. Occasionally, a local Chick-fil-A will send someone out and sell chicken sandwiches from a kayak or a canoe. I want to go to there. Fort Walton Beach has a deep-rooted history that dates back thousands of years to the indigenous peoples of the region. The city is home to one of the largest prehistoric Native American ceremonial sites in the southeastern United States, the Indian Temple Mound Museum. The mound was built by the Pensacola culture around 700 AD, and today, the museum offers insight into the lives and customs of the area's earliest inhabitants. It is a national landmark and one of the oldest prehistoric sites in all of Florida. For military history buffs, Fort Walton... I ate lunch. You can tell. You already know this. I already ate lunch. There's no... I could try to tell you I didn't, but you'd know. Be useless. For military history buffs, Fort Walton Beach is near Eglin Air Force Base, one of the largest air bases in the United States and the world, spanning 724 square miles. The Air Force Armament Museum, I don't know what armament is, located just a short drive from the city, showcases historic aircraft, missiles, and weaponry, offering a fascinating glimpse into military aviation history. As a result of having the military base, Fort Walton Beach serves as a home for military personnel while stationed there, and many actually return later in life to make it their permanent residence. Now, this brings us to Marie Carlson and what brought her to Fort Walton Beach. Marie was born in October of 1974 in the Philippines to a single mother before being taken in by the family of a serviceman and raised with their 6 children. And that's actually where secrets started in Marie's life. And it wasn't until years after she was living with the family that she learned that the man who took her in, who she thought was like just somebody that I guess her family knew that was being helpful, this guy was actually her biological father. And her sister, Esta, said that when they found out that she was actually their sister, because up until this point, Marie and Esta just thought they were best friends, right? It was like they grew up together. They became best friends. Like, how awesome is that? We grew up together. And then they find out they're sisters. And she was like, we were so happy. And she said she kind of always felt like they were sisters. They do favor a lot. She said she felt like always felt like they were sisters, but this was like, made it official. When they were older, Esta and Marie actually moved to Florida and lived together. And they chose an apartment that was literally directly behind a karaoke bar so they could go sing karaoke all the time. That was like one of Marie's absolute favorite things to do. She had a passion for cooking and fitness as well. Esta says that Marie's favorite word was beautiful, and she always wanted people to feel good about themselves, so she was constantly giving compliments to boost people up. She always wore pink, and Esta said that matched her personality. She wore like this very bright, pretty pink. She was full of life, and friends said she almost had a gravitational force or like a magnetism that pulled people in and just made everybody feel better. She would tell Esta, live your life to the fullest. We're not promised tomorrow, that kind of thing. Marie ended up meeting a man named Jeff Carlson, and the two hit it off very quickly, and they started dating. They eventually got married, and they had a daughter named Paris. They felt like their life together was set up perfectly. Marie went to school and got a degree in criminal justice, and then she became a deputy sheriff. Her goal was to work her way up and gain experience, and then she wanted to join the FBI. But as can happen, things come up and relationships change. When she was younger, Marie had been sexually assaulted, and Jeff said that she never seemed to fully recover from that. They worked on their marriage. They tried to stay together, but ultimately they separated. Jeff says that while Marie had so much love for their daughter and for all of her friends and family, she never seemed to fully love herself. And he felt like that was a big part of the reason that she was having trouble. They stayed on friendly terms after their divorce. Marie's life spiraled a bit. She ended up drifting and she had different jobs that all fell through. It seemed like she just sort of lost her way. She had a career that she was very excited about, at least seemingly in the beginning. But it was like everything just sort of started to fall apart for her, which is really, really unfortunate. She moved around from place to place. And then when Paris was 3, Jeff was like, look, I think that Paris needs to live with me. She needs to have a more stable life. Marie just really wasn't settled. She wasn't holding jobs necessarily. She was bouncing around a lot. And he said, initially Marie kind of fought that. She didn't want to be separated from her daughter, but she knew that in the end that was the best thing for her because Jeff did have a stable life and she wasn't there yet. Marie did still see Paris very often, though. They talked on the phone all the time. She loved Paris very much. And it was after Paris was staying with Jeff that Marie found something that brought a renewed sense of focus and vigor in her life. She found the Calvary Emerald Coast Church in Fort Walton Beach. This was a church that was in a strip mall, so it wasn't a fancy place. But they said, it's not about the building. It's about salvation, right? It doesn't matter what building we're in. I mean, the church that I go to, we meet in a construction building. Like, that way we can give more money to other people. It's a huge blessing that they let us meet there. We don't have to pay rent and stuff like that. So that can go to our other outreach services. So it definitely kind of seems like what's really unfortunate is this case is just the perpetrators involved are trash. And them having this, anyway, we'll get there. Anyway, the strip mall church doesn't help the strip mall church, I guess is what I'm saying. Anyway, Marie loved it though. She really felt connected. She felt connected to the people. She felt connected to the pastor. She really felt like his messages resonated with her, that kind of stuff. The pastor was James Flanders, a charismatic, quote, new age pastor who preached in jeans and sneakers. My gosh. Is that new age? That's funny. I don't know, I guess growing up, going to church with like my grandparents, you had to wear like your Sunday best. But now, I mean, I don't know. It's not necessarily that way in most churches now. Or, well, I shouldn't say most churches I've gone to. But anyway, it's just funny. They all called him like new agey because he like jeans and sneakers. He would also live stream his sermons and he would put them up on YouTube. The youth pastor, Jason Anderson, said that James was very charismatic and you wouldn't fall asleep listening to him. He was energetic and fun. You can be the judge of that, I guess. You can check out his YouTube. James and his wife, Tanya. Some people said Tanya. Some people said Tanya. I think I'm going to go with Tanya. Tanya, I reserve only for Tanya Tucker. Almost only. James and his wife, Tanya, were known in the congregation for having huge hearts and helping anyone in need. And Marie had not been attending the church very long before James and Tanya took her into their home. She was struggling both in life in general and spiritually, and they offered to help her in her time of need. So she had told Esta, I'm just going to stay with them until I can get back on my feet, which turned into more of a permanent thing. And before anyone knew it, a year had passed. She's still living with them. Then there were some murmurs floating around that Marie had this abusive ex-boyfriend who had abandoned her when she found out she was pregnant. So in July of 2011, Marie gave birth to another daughter and named her Grace. James and Tanya made sure that Marie knew that she and Grace were still welcomed in their home, and they provided for both of them. Jason, the youth pastor, said that he was told by James, the pastor, that they were just helping Marie out because she was down on her luck. Then one day out of the blue, Marie's friends and family all received this mass text message. And the message said, quote, Yesterday, I left Fort Walton Beach. There is something I've been wanting to do for a very long time, and there will be no better time than now to do it. Smiley face. I didn't tell any of you what I've been planning or that I was about to leave because you would probably have tried to talk me out of it. Smiley face. I appreciate and love all of you! Exclamation point. Now, her friends and family were completely blindsided and confused, but even more confusing to everyone. Because remember, she left. She's got this thing she's wanting to do, except she didn't take her 3-month-old daughter with her. She just left Grace behind with James and Tanya. She also didn't call and speak to Paris. She didn't say goodbye to Paris. She didn't tell Jeff that she was leaving, and they co-parent, like very strange. Esta immediately was like, no, absolutely not. There's something going on. And her family was like, you watch too much Dateline, basically. You watch too much Law and Order. You think everything's a crime. And she's like, might as well call me the Olsen twins because I can solve any crime by dinner time. This is a crime. This doesn't feel right. I don't like it. It does not make no sense. And everybody's like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. So Jeff was one of the people, her ex-husband, who had gotten the text. And he also was like, this does not make any sense. Again, he knew that, yes, Marie might, get a wild hair and decide to take off for a couple days or whatever, but it was never to the point that anybody had ever reported her missing before. And it wasn't like this, just like, well, I've left now, bye. Like, she never would have gone anywhere without talking to Paris first. She never would have gone anywhere without talking to him first. They co-parented together. She talked to Paris on the phone all the time if she wasn't visiting with her. So it just didn't make sense. So Esta and Jeff talked and they were like, this doesn't sound right. And she was like, I think you need to call and report her missing. And he was like, yeah, I think you're right. So he calls Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office to report Marie missing. And he said he was actually surprised when they were like, you know what? We're going to look into this. And he was like, they could very well have said, she's an adult. She can go missing if she wants to. She doesn't have to tell you where she is. If she wants to leave, she can leave, and she kind of did have that history of like taking off for a few days and coming back home. But again, he said she would not leave her children. She would not leave without talking to me and or Paris, both of us. Something's wrong. And thankfully, the police agreed. So it had been a week since Marie had left, and Detective Keith Motz was given the case. He spoke with Marie's family, and they also, that's the same thing. The text was odd, didn't sound like Marie, not the way she texted, all that kind of stuff. So Detective Motz is like, yeah, it just does not sound right. So he ends up partnering with a young detective who had just come off maternity leave, Detective Nestle Suey Moore. Nestle, like the cookies, Nestle Dulaus is her grandmother. I bet you didn't know that. But her name is like legit Nestle. She's so cute. Talking with friends and family, they really felt solidified in their belief that she wouldn't have left either of her children, but especially her 3-month-old daughter. Paris is with her father, and she's safe, and that's where she is used to being and all that kind of stuff. She still wouldn't have left without talking to her, but she wouldn't have necessarily, if she was going to move somewhere, she wouldn't have necessarily tried to take Paris with her. They've already got that arranged, right? But this 3-month-old Grace doesn't have anybody like that. The father's not in the picture, right? So why would she leave her daughter with her pastor and his wife? That doesn't make any sense. And not tell anybody where she was going or when she'd be back. It's not like she said, I'm taking a trip. Can you be with her? Which I still don't think she would have done. And Nestle talked about, having just had her first child and coming off maternity leave. She was like, I just don't think it really made me connect with that thought more, that she wouldn't have left her children, So especially the new baby. She also had a new baby, and she's like, and they were around the same age. And so she's like, I can't imagine just taking off and leaving my 3-month-old behind. So they started to dig into how Marie came to be living with the pastor and his wife in the first place. And they talked with Esta, who said that her relationship with her sister was one where she didn't try to pry. She knew Marie would tell her in her own time. So Esta never pushed her on who is Grace's father, but the detectives needed to find that out. So they had to find any detail that they could. So unfortunately, in that arena, Esta didn't have a ton of information because Marie didn't seem ready to share that yet. About a week and a half after Marie vanished, Detective Motz and Detective Nestle talked to James and Tanya. They said that James was very charismatic. He was really well spoken. The church was a super tight-knit family, and James and Tanya were obviously at the head of it. James told the detectives that this was the not first time. This was the very, very not first time that Marie had taken a spur-of-the-moment trip like this, but it was the first time that it had gone more than a few days and then law enforcement got involved, right? She always came back. James also said that, and Tanya said that Marie's mental health had been suffering. They thought she was getting really, really depressed. They said that she could have these mood swings. She'd been diagnosed as bipolar and was off her meds from when she had Grace. They showed detectives an empty prescription bottle and suggested that Marie had maybe overdosed on it to try to hurt herself. James said that the day that Marie left, he was so worried about her state of mind that he stayed home from work to keep an eye on her. Now, okay, how do you know if something happens to somebody and the law enforcement gets involved? Like this kind of stuff, this is exactly the kind of thing that somebody would say who did something to her and is trying to point you in a different direction, right? Oh, well, her mental state was really bad, and I was actually so worried about her that I stayed home from work that day just to keep an eye on her because I thought she might do something to hurt herself or to hurt Grace. Oh, and she'd been diagnosed with bipolar, and she was off her meds, and she, like all that stuff. So how do we know if you're just saying that to try to take heat off yourself, or if, sometimes these things do happen. Sometimes somebody who is in a depressive state goes missing and the police have to look into it. And so then you're going to have to say that, right? Like, well, actually, this has been happening. I think the difference here is she lived with them. And so what he says happened that day is he'd been home because remember, he thought she was going to do something to hurt herself or hurt Grace. Marie says after a while that she's going to go take a nap. So Tanya decided to take Grace into town so it would be quiet so Marie could sleep. She woke up. James talked to her briefly. Then he decides to go for a run. And he says when he got back from the run, Marie and her truck were just gone. Strangely, she'd packed a bag, but she didn't take anything in the bag. She didn't take the bag. She didn't take the fucking bag. She packed a bag and then left it. Now, my husband just went to a football game with his best friend, and his best friend famously forgets everything every time he goes anywhere. Last time he forgot his wallet and they had to drive like 2 hours back to get his wallet. This time they got all the way to Knoxville where they were going. They got all the way to where they were staying. And he realized that he left his whole damn bag at home. So can that sometimes happen? Of course it can. But coupled with everything else, it's fucking weird. Why would she pack the bag and not take it with her? I'm not saying I've never forgotten stuff, but, just seems weird. So he gets back, all her stuff is packed but not gone. Her car is gone. When she didn't come back that afternoon or the next day, they drove around town looking for her. They decided they would check the airport parking lot to see if her truck was there. Maybe she took a flight. And wouldn't you know it, they found her truck parked there. James said it was in the long-term parking and that they assumed that she had flown somewhere to visit someone. So he took the truck and drove it back to their house. Detectives searched the truck, but there was nothing in it that gave any indication as to where Marie was. Also, if you thought that she flew out somewhere and left her truck there, wouldn't she need her fucking truck when she comes back? When she flies back, she's going to be like, dude, where's my car? I don't know. Where's your car, dude? I left it right here. Where did it go? Like, seriously? They did go to the airlines. There was no record of Marie flying out. And the police suspected that someone possibly moved her car to the airport to make it look like she left. So the detectives go to the toll booth where you pay for your parking, and they look through all of the parking pass tickets until they found the one that was given to the driver of Marie's truck that day. And they were hoping they could get a fingerprint from it. And they did get a print, but it wasn't clear enough to make any identification. So they went to look for the security footage. And guess what happened? Guess what happened?
Oh, our cameras were working that day.
Get your shit together, cameras. All of you cameras, get your shit together. It wasn't working. So detectives are getting absolutely nowhere. Days and weeks went by, and the detectives felt very strongly that this was a homicide investigation. It was not a missing persons case. They just had to find the missing pieces. And they're also, looking through her credit card, activity and stuff like that. There's no activity. It doesn't seem like she's gone somewhere. It seems like she's no longer with us. They ended up talking with the members of the church about Marie and the father of her child, and they all gave the same basic story. Marie was planning on having an abortion, but James and Tanya had very strong feelings about that, so they said, look, we'll adopt Grace. Which, by the way, James and Tanya did not say anything about when they initially talked to them. But all of the church elders or all of the church people they talked to were like, oh yeah, she wasn't going to keep the baby, and so James and Tanya were going to adopt it. One of the church elders told detectives that their plan was that Marie would give birth to Grace, stay 3 months to nurse, and then leave. And that, as he understood it, the plan all along was for Marie to leave. That she would not stay. She'd only be there the 3 months, and then this is their child. He was told that before Grace was even born, that Grace was a gift for James and Tanya from Marie, which did not sit well with Detective Motz and Nestle, because now the abusive ex didn't even seem to exist. There's not... Like, what? What about this? That was never part of the story that these church members were told. They talked with Jeff, her ex-husband. He was told a completely different story, which Marie told him herself because he obviously spoke to Marie quite often. He said that when he asked her about the pregnancy, she said that she was acting as a surrogate and they did an artificial insemination. And the father was Pastor James Flanders. At this point, the detectives were like, okay, we need to go back and talk with some people. They wanted to talk to what they refer to as the inner circle, the church elders, the people that were closest to James and Tanya. There were 3 female members who were Tanya's confidants. And upon talking with them, they confirmed this story, but said that Tanya had sworn them to secrecy. But she didn't stop there. So yes, her story was that Marie was basically a surrogate. But she also told them that they had initially tried to use a turkey baster type setup for Marie to get pregnant, which oh my gosh. Can you imagine you and your husband sitting down with somebody who, at this point, I would say you're close friends with, lives with you, you spend a lot of time with them, and you're like, hey, so we need a surrogate, which there's nothing wrong with that. I think surrogates are great. But just the general conversation of like, you guys are all sitting at the dinner table or you're all sitting on the couch watching Friends or something, and you're like, so what I'm thinking is he'll jizz in a cup and then we'll take a turkey baster and you'll shove it up there and try to get all of his jizz in there. It's just, I don't know. It's like, I know you're my pastor. That's kind of weird. And like, I know you have to jizz in a cup, which means you have to jack it. And I know about it. And I'm going to get the cup of the jizz where you jacked it. It's just a whole thing. I don't know. It's just weird. So anyway, that didn't work though. And so when that didn't work, Tanya said that they did it the old-fashioned way, which meant that James and Marie had sex. So the detectives invited James and Tanya to come in and voluntarily talk with them. James said, absolutely no thank you, but thank you for asking. How kind of you to ask, but no thank you. And Tanya was like, I'll do it, whatever. So she said that that she was actually there when James and Marie had sex. And she said James and Marie were both super drunk, but she was real sober. And she watched. She was there. She was in the room when the whole thing happened. She said that she and James were welcoming Marie into their marriage as a sister wife. She said they were all three really happy together and it was going great. But after Grace was born, they said Marie became more withdrawn when they would broach the subject of adopting Grace like they had planned to do. And at this point, detectives know that the pastor and his wife did something to Marie. They talked with church members who recalled conversations with James and Tanya where Tanya would playfully say, well, James couldn't hurt anyone, but I could. I don't think James could kill her, but I could do it. They looked back through old sermons of James's and noticed in one of them, he spoke about some things in the Old Testament that seemed to justify polygamy, or he tried to spin it that way, but it was like one of those things where like just in general, as a general sermon, he tried to throw it out there and gauge everybody's response. And everybody was like, what the fuck are you doing? I don't think so. And so he was like, okay, never mind. Forget about that. Forget I ever said that. About 2 months after Marie disappeared, detectives got permission to view cell phone data for Marie, James, and Tanya. Tanya's cell phone was nowhere near Marie's when she went missing, but James and Marie's phones were on the same tower when she sent that mass message to her friends and family. When her truck was taken to the airport, James's phone was also connecting to towers near the airport. Next, the youth pastor, Jason, came to detectives saying that something had been weighing on him. So James had gone to another church elder and had asked him to help James flee the country shortly after Marie disappeared. And the elder was like, does this have anything to do with Marie? And James was like, it's just bad. It's really bad. It's really bad. He said that James kind of seemed suicidal. And so he called a friend who was a doctor. So the doctor spoke with James and then committed him to a psychiatric ward for 10 days because of the fear that he would hurt himself. During that time, Jason, the youth pastor, had to take over as the lead pastor as well. And at that time, he started hearing people in the congregation talk about the whole polygamy situation that was going on with James, Tanya, and Marie. So he and fellow leaders confronted James and Tanya when James was released, and James admitted to them that he had been sleeping with both Tanya and Marie. Now, Keith, at this part when he's talking to Jason, he's like, I mean, you kind of had to have forgive my phrase here, come to Jesus with him. And Jason's like, nah, I see what you did there. Because church. So he did. They had to come to Jesus. And James was like, you got me. I'm totally trying to have like 2 wives. I know it's like frowned upon. Okay. But it's not illegal, right? Whoopsie. So not only did he admit that he was having this sexual relationship with Marie during the course of his marriage, he just couldn't shut up. And so he also said, yeah, and the day that she went missing, we had this physical altercation. We had gotten into it. She scratched my arm up, but she was definitely alive the last time I saw her. So they ended up forcing James to resign from the church. The next morning, James and Tanya were supposed to say goodbye to the church members. They were all going to get together and have like a goodbye thing. But midnight the night before, they loaded up everything. They took Grace with them and they fled to Arizona. Jason told his story to detectives a few days after they left for Arizona. A family friend, someone who served as basically a mother to Marie. So Marie lived with the serviceman, in quotes, which ended up being her father for her childhood. And then after she moved out of there, she moved in with this woman who took her in. And I think her name was Kay. If I'm wrong, I'll fix it later. But then she lived with her. And so she was kind of a mother figure to her. And then she lived with, she was married and then she lived with her, with pastor after that. So anyway, so this is the family friend. She had asked James and Tanya, well, since Marie left, can I have her belongings before you leave? And so they were like, yeah, fine. So they give her a box. It has Marie's computer in it, but it had been wiped clean. So she took it to the sheriff's department to see if they could get anything out of it. And they were able to find things that didn't get wiped out, including the backups of Marie's cell phone. They found thousands of text messages, but they were pretty much unreadable. They had different symbols and things in them. They were all jumbled together. It wasn't anything that you could really understand. Then an anonymous phone call came into the Crime Stoppers line saying that Marie had been killed and buried in the backyard of the house that James and Tanya had lived in. So they took cadaver dogs and ground penetrating radar to the house, but they never found anything. So they were like, must have been a faulty tip. Time goes on. Detectives keep trying to talk to James. He keeps dodging them. But then about a year later, they called and he actually picked up. And he said, the first thing he said was, listen, guys, my attorney says that I really don't need to talk to you without him present, okay? But let's go ahead and try it anyway. And so then he talks for 2 hours. And during the time that he's talking, he's painting himself as a victim. He's had all these various emotions for not getting Marie help. And he's terrified that Marie took her own life and it would be linked back to him if they found any bones that were anywhere close to where they lived. And he hopes that she's alive, but if she's not, he hopes that she died by suicide far, far, far away from him so that it can't be pinned on him. That's what you're worried about. I mean, I get that if you're a suspect in a murder that you would be worried about that, but like, it's very, very self-serving the way he's talking about it. And it's like gross. I don't know. They said, dude, fuck off. Do you know where Marie is? He's like, no. And they're like, did you have anything to do with her disappearance? He's like, no. And they're like, did you kill her? And he's like, no. And they're like, ugh, okay, whatever. I mean, at this point, they have nothing to hold him on. So the case is going cold. People are starting to lose hope that anything's going to happen. But then 3 years after her disappearance, there's a new forensic program that had come out that they've had some success with. So they decide to use it on her computer. And remember when they did the extraction the first time, they weren't able to get anything that was in a readable form. But this time they were able to go in and it was perfect. There were lots and lots and lots of text messages to go through. But there was a text where Marie and James had talked about how much they loved one another. They're going into graphic detail about the things that they want to do to each other. And they even sent each other pornographic photos. And the detective said, from the church, this man is sending these photos. Like, gosh. But the day that Marie disappeared, everything stopped. No communication whatsoever after that. And it doesn't seem like James or Tanya are texting her and they're like, hey, where are you? When are you going to come back? Grace needs you. Like, none of that stuff. It was very strange. Her last conversation with a family member was Marie saying that she wanted out of the circumstances that she had found herself in, but she did not want to leave Grace behind. She was not going to leave without her daughter. So detectives knew that they only had circumstantial evidence against James, but they spelled it all out to the prosecutors and they felt like they could make the case. Now, the other thing that's very interesting about this is during the time that Marie was still pregnant, the church had a baby shower for before Grace was born, but it was for Tanya. It wasn't for Marie. Marie is sitting there next to her in every single one of these pictures, but Tanya is the one who's opening all the gifts. And Tanya put a balloon under her shirt to mimic the pregnancy. Which, if that's your surrogate, then of course you would have a baby shower, I guess. But just, I don't know, the whole thing's yucky. Like, that was Marie's child with James, but she was having to go along with that they were adopting the kid to hide the threesome situation. I'm not really sure. Anyway, it just very strange. So they end up charging James with second-degree murder almost 5 years after Marie had disappeared. He was arrested in Arizona, and his lawyer was optimistic that if they went to trial, they would win. And his lawyer was somebody he went to church with, like that was a member of his congregation at the strip mall church. I forget the name of it now. It's very long. But just before the trial, they ended up making a deal with prosecution with the blessing from Marie's family, which was very difficult for them to do, but they did. So they were going to trial on second-degree murder, but he agreed to plead down to manslaughter. But he had to tell them what happened and where Marie was. And so her family was like, we felt like we had to make that deal because we wanted her home. We wanted to know where she was. James confirmed everything they had learned about Marie becoming a second wife to him. His version was that Marie attacked him when he suggested that she should go to a mental health facility to treat her depression. Y'all, pull over if you're driving, because what he is about to tell you is the reason that Marie Carlson is now dead. You are going to freaking spit your drink out. You're gonna, like, I don't want you to swerve out of anger. You're gonna throw everything out the window. It's fucking preposterous, okay? But just get ready for it. Okay, so he says, I told her, hey, you're like getting real depressed or whatever. You should probably go to a mental health facility. And she was like, what the fuck? What are you talking about? So he said she hit him in the chest. So he grabbed her and he puts her in this bear hug and he's wrapped around her. But then they're scuffling still. And so they both fall to the floor and it was a hard fall. He rolled her over and she was dead. She wasn't breathing. And Keith Morrison in Dateline goes, a fatal bear hug? No, sir, you did not hug her to death. Fuck off. He confirmed, though, that Marie was in fact buried in the backyard. And this is where, look, I love cadaver dogs. They're cute, they're cuddly, they're good puppies. They don't always work, though. Your ground penetrating radar and your cadaver dogs, that can't be the only, like, I'm sorry, but it's not foolproof. And we saw that in Into the Fire. Kathy watched those Google Maps or Google Earth photos of the land in their backyard change over and over and over time. And she said she is buried right the fuck there. That is where she is. And they took those cadaver dogs out there in the ground penetrating radar and they said, nope, there's nothing here. And she's like, that can't be. I know that that's where he's buried her. And she damn sure was right. That's where they recovered her. Like, guys. And Detective Nestle was really upset about that because she's like, I could have found her 6 months after she went missing. But I didn't. I was there and I missed her. And Keith is like, well, I mean, you tried, you looked, like, it's not like you didn't look. And she's like, yeah, but I didn't find her. Like, I should have found her. It was sad. James insisted that Tanya had nothing to do with it. She didn't even know anything about it. He had killed Marie with, bear hug. And then rather than getting her help or anything because she wasn't breathing, he just buried her. And did all that before Tanya even got back from town. How fortuitous for him that she was gone long enough for him to... Do you know how hard it is to dig a hole? They found her 5 feet deep. You know how hard it is to dig a hole? Pretty fucking hard. And he did that, and she got home and was like, how was your day? And he was like, fine. And he drove her car all the way to the airport. How did he get back? There ain't nothing that you can tell me that makes me think Tanya did not know what the fuck was going on, but they didn't have enough evidence to charge her. She fucking knew. Anyway, Tanya was never charged with anything. They've never had anything to do with that. She says that she was just completely shocked by what James confessed to. She had no idea. Tanya has custody of Grace. And Jeff says that they've exhausted every effort they have been able to think of to get Grace from her, but they've been able to do so. I do not understand why. Why does she have custody of Grace? Grace is Marie's daughter. Grace should be with Marie's family, not with the father's wife. The father's the perpetrator. She's the victim. Like, what? I don't understand that. James ended up escorting detectives to where he buried Marie, and then he fell to the ground and cried, and he was like, I'm so sorry. Whatever. Her body had been wrapped in a blanket. It was a performance. James Flanders was given 15 years for Marie Carlson's murder. Absolutely infuriating. But that is the case. I cannot believe that Grace is with Tanya, because you know that Tanya is just going to tell her a bunch of wild ass shit. And also, I don't know. Oh my gosh. Does Tanya still talk to James? Are they still close? Like, are they still married? I don't know. The whole thing is wild. But anyway, super sad case. But let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you next week. Bye. If you like this episode, be sure to like this episode and follow the show so that you never miss out on new episodes. Get in on the conversation on Facebook and Instagram. You can find us at Killer Queens Pod, or you can join our Facebook discussion group at Killer Queens Podcast, where we discuss cases covered on the show and all things 90s. If you want to submit a case to be covered on the show, visit killerqueenspodcast.com/case submission and just complete the form. And if we cover the case, we'll give you a shout out on the show. Lilas.